Okay, I think we're ready now. All right. So let's first start with a definition of psychology. When we look at the roots, of course, psych traditionally means the word mind. Psychology was originally the study of the mind. Ology is kind of the word for study of. So psychology, study of the mind. And this is really, what does the mind mean? It's basically our psyche. It's our mental world. It's our mental life. It's our thoughts, our behaviors, our experiences, all of those kinds of things. Okay. Um, the thing that should be noted is, where do we get our mind from? It actually, if we directly translate the Greek term psyche, it actually means breath, okay, or soul, okay, because what the Greeks believed is we breathe in our psyche in our first breath when we're born. And we breathe out our soul or our mind with our last breath. Okay. So literally, if we were to literally translate the term psyche or mind, it literally translates to the word breath. Okay. Um, and so that's kind of the roots of the term, and kind of the study. It began as a scientific study of just the mind. Probably the more specific definition, or more modern or contemporary definition, is a scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Now let's break this down. First of all, scientific. What does that mean? Scientific means that we use some type of methodology to study something that can be replicated by someone else, to see if it is something that is, some phenomenon is due to a situation within the original research, or if it can be replicated over and over and over. Probably the best example of this is, I drink Diet Pepsi, and every year I hear a study about how bad Diet Pepsi is. And then for some reason that study disappears. And that's usually because in media, they might find this original research. Oh, this is amazing. It's sensationalized. And so they put that on the news, but then those scientists go and try and replicate that evilness of Diet Pepsi, and that research isn't it can't be replicated. Therefore, it's not considered scientific anymore. It's not considered a scientific finding. So when we talk about scientific, we're really talking about things that is done in a systematic way, that can be reproduced by other researchers. Okay. And in this class, I'll mention mostly just the scientific stuff, and stay away from speculation as much as I can. Behavior, when we talk about behavior, these are things that the researcher or the scientist can directly observe. And, so things like crying or reaction time, and those types of things. Mental processes are those things that are covert, or can't be directly observed. So, for example, your attitude towards politics. Okay. I can't directly observe those, but I can give you a survey of some type that lets me know, for example, if you're more conservative or more liberal or whatnot. Depression, while you can see the behaviors such as either undersleeping or oversleeping, overeating, undereating, you can see signals of depressed mood. You really have to give some type of measure in order to understand. You have to go through the person in order to really understand what's going on in their mind. Okay. So now there are some that argue that what psychology should be defined is a study of the brain, because you will notice throughout this class that we try to associate some given behavior or mental processes basically with brain structures or brain processes. Now, there's also a lot of resistance to saying that we're the study of the brain, because this is very much a reductionist model. It's saying that nothing else matters except for processes within the brain. Okay. And the biggest issue with that is still today, for example, I can more accurately state that you're in a state of loneliness by giving you a paper and pencil survey than I can by scanning your brain. Okay. And one is more accurate than the other. So, but there is some movement to be considered, replacing the term mind with the term brain. But that's still of much debate. But it will be a topic we'll cover throughout the course. Okay. So with this definition in mind, we kind of have what we call 4 goals in psychology. Okay. The first one is just to purely describe something and be able to name it and classify it in observable, measurable behaviors. So we're basically trying to give it a definition. And since a good number of you were interested in mental health, I'm going to use a mental health example in understanding these 4 goals. So let's say we have this unique thing where people are always kind of in a sad, unmotivated mood state. Maybe they sleep too much. Their eating patterns have changed. They stop finishing tasks. And so we have this phenomenon, okay? And so what are we going to do that? Because it kind of is outside the normal range of behaviors. We're going to describe it and give it a name. We're going to call this depression, okay? Because what the person is in a depressed mood, and it's observed through their eating and sleeping habits and their work completion habits. But it's also something where that we can measure this constant feeling of doom and sadness. And that's the measurable part. And we find that it's different from, for example, people who are anxious all the time, or people who are overreactive at times. Okay. And so it's something unique. So the next thing we want to do is we want to understand what depression is, being able to state the causes of a behavior, what needs to be in place for a person to experience depression. And this is kind of important, okay? Because depression is what we call an environmental biological interaction, okay? For the majority of people, we have a negative event and we fall into a state of depression. And for about 90% of individuals, those depression symptoms will go away after 90 days. They'll just kind of, just like if you want to think about it, about a common cold or the flu, after a certain point of time, the virus leaves and you're okay. For about 10% of people, those symptoms continue after 90 days. They become what we call generalized depressive disorder. And so these individuals, we're saying these are the causes, and we notice that some tend to have a larger biological reaction, that 10%, whether it's due to genetics or something like that, that then they can't leave that state. They can't leave that depressive state. And then for others, we see that the brain doesn't react as much, and so it abates. So we're understanding the different states of the causes of this behavior. And then we want to predict, and this is being able to forecast behavior accurately. So given, if a person, probably a good example, I'll go to loneliness, right? Extended states of loneliness in childhood predicts is probably one of the better predictors of suicidality in adolescence. Okay. Um, and this is kind of what we're trying to do is how can we forecast, for example, adolescent suicidality from previous experiences? And in this case, one predictor is loneliness. Okay. We also see loneliness predicts depression. Okay. And so we're forecasting what experiences do a person need to have and to put them in that state. And how accurate can we get at doing that? And I will tell everybody, not very. We deal with probability, and you won't find anything that is perfectly predictable in the study of psychology. And then for ill or better, the last goal of psychology is control. And this is being able to alter the condition that influences behavior. On the good part of this, we can think of clinical psychologists who try to help alleviate the symptoms of depression and whatnot. But we also know that not all psychologists are altruistic. And if we look back in the Iraq War with interrogation techniques, there was actually two pretty famous psychologists who ended up going through trials over this, who used what we know about psychology and interrogation processes that were heavily, heavily unethical. And so we see that this control part can be used for good or ill. And so that's what the control aspect is. Okay. So this is what we're trying to do. And as we go through each topic, we'll go through the description of it, the understanding, the prediction, and the control of each of the conditions that we talk about as we go through the class. Okay. So what I want to go over is just some of the myths and misconceptions about psychology and what it is. And the first myth is that psychology is all about mental health, that all we concern ourselves is with the ills of the world, depression, anxiety, and schizophrenia, and all of those kinds of things. And this myth does have some grounding in reality. If we look at the American Psychological Association, they have 52 different subfields of psychology. And about 52% of members of the American Psychological Association are clinical psychologists, the ones that go in and assess and treat mental illness. So this myth does, there's an understanding of why that myth exists. But indeed, in the field of psychology, we study much more than mental illness. In fact, if we look since 1999, there's been what's called the positive psychology movement, where we look at why people do the right thing, what makes some people more motivated than others, what is happiness, and all of those kinds of things. So this is a myth because you'll notice in our class list, we can include emotions and stress in this. We only have really two sections that deal with, true abnormality. So the second myth is psychology is not a science. And this, again, I think is precipitated by a lot of behaviors and bad practices that a lot of psychologists and counselors use. But it is a truth that even clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists are trained first as scientists and second as clinicians. And in fact, if you look at the best kind of treatment process, they use the scientific method. So what do we do in a scientific method? We have a problem, right? And so we give that problem a definition, kind of like the 4 goals. And then we look at the client's history. We do an assessment. This is kind of like a literature review when we're doing the scientific process. We're interviewing the client and we're comparing that, what the client has gone through, with data or previous experiences or something of someone else. And then we create a hypothesis. In clinical psychology, we call this a diagnosis, okay? And then we do some type of, in experiment, we do kind of an experiment. In the case of clinical psychology, we put the individual through some therapeutic modality, okay? And then at the end of that therapeutic modality, we see if the person's symptoms got better or worse. If they got better, that informs us for the next patient. If it gets worse, we start all over again and we go through the assessment process again. We create another hypothesis. We put another treatment in, and then we see if it gets better or if it gets worse. So even our clinical folks use the scientific process in the treatment process. And I will say, in my graduate years, what was it? My doctorate required 90 credits. But 70 of those credits were in research and statistics. Only about, well, what's the math? 20% was content classes. So just kind of one of those myths things. The other myth, and I love warning everyone about this, but it can be fun sometimes, is psychologists can read minds, okay? If you have a counselor or a psychologist who says just spending 15 or an hour with you, I can tell everything about you. And if you see a counselor or something like this, leave because a psychologist cannot read minds. That we can't just look at someone and go, oh, that's your problem or that's what's going on. No, no one can really do that. But I will tell you if someone is annoying me or something like that, and they ask, "Are you reading my mind?" Sometimes I'll go, "Yeah," because then it messes with them. So, if you are a psychology student or going into that field, sometimes you do utilize that. So, but that's probably what creates the myth. So those are kind of the three main misconceptions about psychology and the practice of it. But then there's some other things such as traditional research has shown. So these are things that again that reproduction of research of redoing a lot of experiments show us. So for a good portion of psychology, we promoted the idea that opposites attract. Okay. And we thought, okay, I mean, this makes sense. They're bringing different qualities to the table, and so it makes a more complete couple. But what we found is it's not that it's kind of more of birds flock together. We find that people who are in healthy, long-lasting relationships are more like each other and less opposite of each other. Okay. And what research has shown in this line, the reason why um, people are attracted to people who are like them is because it makes it easier to relate with them. If you're with someone who is like you and they have a negative reaction, you don't need to figure out what you need to do to react back to them because they're like you. So you understand where they're at and you can react to them. If you have someone who is opposite to you, it can create more conflict because then they're saying, well, you're not responding to me correctly. You don't understand me. You don't get me. Okay. And we find that creates a lot of tension in the relationship and often creates negativity between the two individuals who are trying to create more of a single unit in a relationship. So opposites attract. There are definitely people who are attracted to strangers. We got to remember how diverse human behavior is. But for the good number of human beings, it's not opposite attracts. It's more like birds of a feather flock together. Okay. The second myth is lie detector tests are accurate. While we can guess that this was false because they're not even admissible in court. But current reproducible research, and this is going to ruin it for those who watch Maury Povich when they do is he cheating on me or not, is lie detectors are only accurate about 46% of the time. And that's about their accuracy rate according to research that has been done over about the last 15 years. So something to keep in mind as you're watching Maury Povich. The second kind of myth is that ESP, this ability to read someone's mind or to push objects with your mind, has actually been shown to exist, that there is some type of psychic energy that you can remote control some things. So there's that. This one is an active line of research, so I hesitate to say much more about it. People use only 10% of their brain. No, we don't. The reason why that myth is there is that we're actually born with only about 10% of a fully developed brain. Okay. And this is where the myth that we only use 10% of our brain comes from. About 90% of our brain physically develops after the birth to about 6 years of age. But when it was observed that we're only born with a 10% physical capacity, this is where this myth comes from. The truth is, and I hope everybody is relieved by this, we use 100% of our brain. It may seem like some people don't, but it is true. People often repress traumatic childhood memories. Again, this is kind of a myth. Where this comes from is the notion of repression. The notion of repression states that we purposely forget something. We push it into our subconscious, and we forget it as a sense. And the truth is that we can't purposely forget something. We can't choose to forget a memory. And probably the best example of this is what's called the pink elephant experiment. All right. And so if I were to ask everybody to imagine a pink elephant, maybe it's a stuffed animal pink elephant or a live pink elephant or whatever, and I asked you to tell me when you forget about that pink elephant. And so, a lot of times I'll sit silent in a class and someone will say, I forgot. And I go, what did you forget? The pink elephant. Oh, so you're remembering the pink elephant. So once you say you forgot something, you got to remember what you're forgetting. Okay. And so that's the idea of repression. Now, so why is there some adults who get into adulthood and they start having all of these memories about things that happen to them in life and whatnot? And this was a big thing in the late 1990s, where it became this whole huge number of individuals who apparently had been sexually abused in their childhood, and then they go to court and the evidence isn't just there, it's just not there. The timelines and everything are not just there. And this is where this whole debate came from, is what is a repressed or a repressed memory? Well, the brain does have a mechanism. Your brain is aimed at protecting you physically for your survival, okay? And so when a person is going through a severe traumatic experience, the emotional center of the brain, which is centered in the limbic, is closely related to the memory area of the brain. And when someone experiences trauma, it can make the brain, I don't mean to give the brain a personage, that it's its own thinking thing, but I'm going to use that as an example. The brain says, you're not safe to remember this. This is not a safe memory for you. Okay. And, but then very commonly, once they leave that family environment, the house, the relatives, and maybe they go to college and live in the dorms and they become safe, the brain will start releasing and saying, okay, you're safe. Here you go. Here's your memories. And that's where a lot of individuals kind of start going to a therapist and going, I don't remember this happening, but it's a constant thing. I wake up with nightmares and night terrors and all those kinds of things. And this happened. Okay. That person didn't choose to repress those memories. That was a mechanism within our brain system that did that. Now, what about this thing in the 90s? What we actually found out in the late 90s is a problem with the whole debate about, recovery of memories and stuff. We actually went back and looked at the tapes of some of the treatments the assessments that were being, and we found that the therapist seeded those memories and push the individual to go down that route, and then they basically created that false memory. Okay. Now, this is where often when you look at, is someone truly remembering traumatic memories from a childhood, they should bring it up. It shouldn't be suggested to them. If they come and say, I'm remembering all this stuff, but no one has seeded that they should have experienced that, then that can tell you that it's a true memory. Okay. So we will have much more to say on repression a little bit later, but that's kind of the situation as of right now. The second one is students benefit for teachers catering to different learning styles. So, you're a kinesthetic learner, you're an auditory learner, you're a visual learner, and there's still a multi-million-dollar industry on this idea of learning styles and teachers making sure that, if you have a student who's an auditory learner, you teach auditorily. This is false. I mean, there's been about 6 meta-analysis done in the last 10 years. And the whole idea of learning styles is really just a bucket of crap. Okay. In fact, what we have found from these analyses is that you should actually study in a method that doesn't make you comfortable. Okay. So if you're an auditory learner, you should study visually. Okay. The reason is that makes you deep process the information. It makes you work with it. It makes you dig into it and understand it. And that creates those neural connections to maintain that memory. When you're using what's easy for you, you do what's called shallow processing. And shallow processing is when you're just kind of going, okay, this is easy, blah, blah, blah. But then you probably find yourself, you can't remember it for very long because you didn't take that time to really focus on it and studying from the opposite of what makes you comfortable actually improves learning and memory. Okay. This one's kind of a fun one, especially at the beginning of the semester. Talk about if you're taking a multi question exam, multiple choice exam. It is actually best to stick to your initial intuition on a multiple choice question. When they say, when you go back and you start questioning and change the answer on all the, that actually is not a good idea. We find that people who go back and change the answer tend to get it wrong more times than people who leave their original answer in place. So, and the next one is people who have psychological disorders are more prone to violence. I will say that this is completely wrong. People who have mental health issues meaning that they don't take care of themselves, are they prone to violence? Yes, but someone with a psychological disorder is really no more prone to violence than the general population. In fact, I've often been asked, where is the safest place to live? What country, what city, what place? And I always say, the best place to live is in a community living center for schizophrenics. Okay. Schizophrenics, those people who hear voices, have disorganized thinking, have delusional thinking of grandeur or some type. These are the individuals who might have that tin foil on their head so that the aliens don't hear them or the government doesn't hear them. And I'm kind of giving some stereotypical solution, but a lot of people say, well, a lot of violent people said they hear voices, and then that's made them do what they do. But I will tell you that a community of schizophrenics, statistically, you're less likely to be harmed in a community living center with schizophrenics than you are just being in your own home or in a public place. You're more likely to be violated in your home or in a public place or by your neighbor than you are by a community of schizophrenics. And that also brings up the other thing. So what about people who hear voices about harm to each other? Well, the difference between someone who has schizophrenia and someone who has been hopped up on methamphetamine or cocaine or some type of drugs is schizophrenics, their voices often are towards self-deprecation. So the voices they hear are, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're always making mistakes, you should just hurt yourself. Those are the voices that a schizophrenic's heard. Individuals who are hopped up on methamphetamine and cocaine are the ones that hear voices about harming other people. So if you have someone who is saying they're hearing voices and visions about hurting other people, you probably should get them to a sober living house. If you hear someone saying, I constantly am hearing hallucinations about what an awful person I am, you might want to consider a mental health provider. So, okay. So that is that. So those are some of the myths and whatnot, and some differentiations of things to think about. All right. So the last topics, and again, this is just to differentiate scientific psychology from other kind of types of psychology. So other types of methods to predict behavior in human processes. They are often called pseudo-psychologies, or pseudo either means alongside or a false thing. Now, before I get into these, because there might be some of these systems that someone might relate with, it brings value to their life, they feel good about it. I'm not saying you need to change your mind about these, okay? What I'm saying is we scientifically, you can't prove them. They can't prove that they work. And that might be due to the technology limitations we have to investigate. Okay, and I'll bring this example up in developmental psychology as an example. For the longest time in psychology and even the popular world, we assumed that infants were born kind of stupid, okay, to put it bluntly, that with a blank mind, and that's why they're so curious, is because they want to learn and adapt to the world. But then when we got better and better technologies to understand infants, we actually find they have a very complex world. So when we get to developmental psychology, we'll talk about how a 6-month-old infant is better at statistics and probability than the average adult is. They are calculating probabilities all the time, and they're really good at it. We find that their logic systems are actually more advanced than adults, and the current belief is that language and culture kind of beat those out of them, and so that's why we become worse at statistics and logic, is due to culture and our social living. But anyways, and so this is what I'm trying to say with this is that if it works for you, just because it doesn't have scientific evidence doesn't mean it might not be real or it doesn't work, okay? The other thing I want to emphasize is we will show that some of these things are grounded in reality. There are some evidence for these types of pseudo psychologies, okay? So the first one I want to start with is something called phrenology, okay? Phrenology is this idea that you can feel someone's head and feel and you can tell by the dents or the bumps in the person's skull about their personality, about who they are as an individual, okay? And in fact, when phrenology was big in the 18th and 19th century, when we didn't have TVs or whatnot, if you wanted to do a slamming party, you often would invite a phrenologist over who would read all of your guests' heads and tell them, well, you must be good at drawing, or you should focus on open access or hip hop or something like that. That's who you are, and and there was a lot of entertainment behind these things. Well, do the bumps on your head or indentations in your head really tell you anything about it? And I should tell you why they kind of thought this, and it kind of makes sense. If anyone knows, when an infant is born, they're born with a soft skull. In fact, they have a soft spot on the top of their head, and it was assumed that the reason that you could tell a person's personality is that they assume that as the infant was coming out of mom's womb and going through the pelvic canal, that the kind of skull was formed to the brain. Okay. And so if the brain had a certain area that it emphasized or de-emphasized, the skull would mold to the outer part of the brain. I should note that no, that isn't true. The reason we have that soft spot is so that the skull could compress so it can make it through the pelvic canal. So that's actually why we have a soft spot. But so let's fast forward though. I mean, what can be said about this idea? Well, it did lend us to our investigation of the brain. Okay. Because what phrenology is stating is there's certain areas of the brain that control certain parts of our behavior and mental processes. And this became known as localization of function. Okay. And it is true that certain areas of the brain control certain parts of our perception. So, for example, we actually don't see with our eyes, we see with the back of our head. This area right here is what's called the occipital lobe. And the impulse from the sensory go clear back here. And this is actually where we see. So when your mom said that she had eyes in the back of her head, guess what? She did. Okay. If we look around here, this is the temporal area. This area, the peripheral level, gives us our sense of depth and organization. We have motor areas right here. There's a motor strip right here that if you prick it, your arm might move or you might blink or something like that. And then we have frontal cortical areas that deal with our social world and our logical thinking areas. And so while phrenology, the whole idea of the skull isn't factual, it gave us this idea of localization of function. And we'll get more into that when we get to biological psychology. So what's another one? Okay. Okay. Palm reading is another good example of a pseudopsychology. Palm reading is the idea that, you look at the lines in your hand and in this view. So this is the line of life, dependent upon its length, will tell you how long you'll live, how you'll do with relationships, the health of your heart, and that these lines have some type of meaning and predict something. Uh, and so again, from a scientific perspective, do the lines in your hand, and I've even heard lately about if your big toe is shorter than the toe next to it, that means something. And is there any facts? The answer is no, and not from a scientific perspective. But are we able to tell different psychological states based on physical attributes of the individual? And first, let me tell you where palm reading evolved from. Palm reading evolved about 2,400 years ago. And this is when, at least in the area where it was developed, we had a more naturalistic version of human existence. We believed that we humans were part of nature. Nature is part of being human. And if you look at, for example, lines in trees, for example, the tree rings can tell you how old the tree is. You can look at how weathered a plant is and its health by its whittling leaves and all those kinds of things. So the idea was is that you could tell something by the weathering of our hands because we use our hands the most, right? And so the lines, the stress of the lines and everything must mean something. Well, is there fact to visual? It's true. I mean, when we want to know someone's emotional state by just looking at them, we can do it with about a 60% accuracy. Um, can you tell someone is falling in love with you? The answer is yes. You look at their eyes. When someone is really into somebody, the eyes don't dilate. They dilate to what's called the 0.7 mark. But if you turn off the lights and turn on the lights, you won't see any dilation in the eye. And so, next time you're on a date and you want to know if he or she is into you, kind of, hey, close your eyes for a minute and then get your cell phone and do the flashlight and say, okay, open it. And if the eyes constrict because of the light, probably should say no to the second date. But if the eyes stay dilated to that 0.7 kind of the majority of the eye is dilated, then hey, there might be something there. The whiteness of the eye. The whiter that is, the more healthy an individual is. When we start get coloration in the whiteness of our eyes, that tends to denote things like kidney or liver issues and whatnot. So can we tell something by looking at the physical attributes of a person and tell about their state? Yes. Is it probably in our hands? Probably not. So that's the state of that situation. The last well, I think this is the last one, I think. The last one that we'll deal with tonight is astrology. And I always find this one kind of fun to take a look at. I listen to I think it's called John Jay and Rich, and I always listen to their little astrology thing in the morning where they say this is the kind of day you're gonna have, and it's always really kind of entertaining. But astrology is that your existence, your personality, who you are, is based on the star constellations when you were born. Okay. And this one is an easy one to say to debunk um, for this very scientific basic reason. The astrology maps were developed about 2,000 years ago. Okay. And they haven't changed since. The problem is in the last 2,000 years, the stars constellations have adjusted by 6 months. Okay. So what does that mean? So according to the astrology maps, I should be a Leo. Okay. But when I was born, that wasn't the stars constellations that were in the sky. No, I have to look 6 months later. I have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My actual sign, according to the theory of astrology, is I'm an Aquarius. Okay. And so if you want to know your true astrological sign, take what the little map here says and add 6 months. And I'm sorry if you've enjoyed your current one, but it's not exactly who you are. But with that being said, is there something to be said about time and place of birth? Yes, there is evidence for that. And the first place we could start is sports. And this is true, and I believe baseball and hockey that this can be shown. Most pro hockey players were born in the month of December and January. Um, and people go, well, hockey's a cold sport, so it was because they were born in the cold months, and that's what influenced them to become a pro player. And the truth about it is no, Actually, the cutoff for entering hockey into the what would it be called, the little leagues or whatever it is in the month of December and January. Meaning that if you were born in December and January, you have a full year's practice ahead of everyone else. Meaning that it's a practice effect. It has nothing to do really with being born in January and December. In fact, if they made the cutoff date in August, most pro hockey players would be born in July and August. Okay. And so, but does that have to do with sure, because it gives that advantage, that advantage to those individuals. We can talk about a disadvantage. If you're born in the month of August, September, where the cutoffs for entering school. Okay. And so let's say that the cutoff is in September and or August, and your birthday is right there in September. Okay. Um, what's that going to be? It means that you're going to be the most youngest person in your class. Okay. Um, and we find that children who are diagnosed with ADHD tend to be born in the month of September. Okay. And so, is there something about the weather and the environment that these children are being born with ADHD and you shouldn't try to have a child during that time period? The answer is, well, yeah, if you don't want your child to be diagnosed due to social reasons. Because how are most children diagnosed with ADHD? It's usually a teacher comparing behaviors of their class to the student. Okay. And if you're born in that month, you are the youngest person in that class. You're the less mature student in that class. So you're more likely to be fidgetive. You're more likely not to pay attention as long as your classmates and those kinds of things. And so the teacher is observing everyone as an equal in the classroom. And so they see these younger children tend to not have attention, tend to be more fidgetive. And so then they start bringing in the professionals, and then the child ends up being diagnosed with ADHD. What about time and place? So is there something about where you're born, who you're born to, and the time you're born at? And we could look at a lot of examples. Bill Gates is probably a really good example because everyone feels that he's a self-made man. He created this, but the reality of it is, I want you to think about this. He was actually born to a fairly wealthy family. They did well. His dad, I believe, was a lawyer, and his mom did something else. And back then, to use a computer, you used to have this little card, or there were even coin slots that you could use. But those things, they limited the amount of time you could be on a computer. So a lot of times, a kid in school could have a card that allows them to be on a computer for 2 hours a week, for example. After that, they couldn't log in or anything like that. But that's how computers used to work. Well, I believe it was a junior high or a late elementary school. The school that Bill Gates went to was in big need of a computer lab. Okay. And Bill Gates' parents said, okay, we will pay for this computer lab on one condition. You don't limit the amount of time little Billy can use the computer. He can use the computers on an unlimited basis. Okay. And so what did that mean for Bill Gates? Well, the truth of the matter is that by the time he graduated from high school, he had clocked more computer time than most of the PhDs in computer information systems had clocked. He already had used a computer longer than graduates of this type of thing. So was he a genius? Yeah, because he had parents who could make him a genius. Okay. And we can see this with there's a good book by Gladwell called Outliers that kind of lay out, when we think of great people, It's always about the time and place they were born. If we look at, we just celebrated Martin Luther King, and a great man, because he was born in the right place and the right time to create the change he wanted to. Most would argue if MLK was born today, he'd probably be maybe a good podcaster at most. Okay, so time and place does matter. Right now, does it deal with the stars and alignment? Well, as I said, you got to add 6 months to that. Okay, and all right. So these we're going to save for next time. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop recording.